The president of Americans for Prosperity, Tim Phillips, joins us again. Mr. Phillips, thanks for sticking with us.
You bet. Glad to be here.
All right. As I have explained, I think it's important that you have a long history, a long effective history in advocacy politics. So I want to ask you about something I have never understood about your background. While you were working at Century Strategies and Millennium Marketing, Jack Abramoff was representing the Marianas Islands, and that's a place where you could sew a Made in the USA label into clothes made by Chinese workers in conditions that were not subject to US safety standards. And your company, Millennium Marketing, put out mailers to Christians in Alabama asking them to lobby to keep those Chinese workers there because, I'm quoting, they are exposed to the teachings of Jesus Christ while working in the Marianas, and that many, quote, are converted to the Christian faith and return to China with Bibles in hand. When you look back at that, do you stand by that?
I didn't do that particular project at Century,
okay.
But I don't have an issue with it. I don't. I think that you have an opportunity in politics to make your point of view, and to some Americans that would matter. The being able to spread the gospel would matter to them. I think that's a relatively or a reasonable point of view to have. I didn't do that project, but I'm not going to disown it.
But you were at Millennium Marketing when that happened.
I was at Century Strategies.
At Century Strategies, and Millennium Marketing is part of that.
Correct.
All right. The reason that I wanted to ask you about this is because a year before that mailing went out, the Interior Department had published a report. It was a year before that said actually what Chinese workers were getting in the Marianas was not religion, but they were getting sweatshop conditions and forced prostitution and forced abortions. And that was the U.S. government's official policy on the working conditions for Chinese workers before you sent that out saying, listen, they're becoming Christians.
Well, before Millennium Marketing sent that out,
If I had been part of that group sending out that mailing when that was the public knowledge of what was happening to those workers, I would disown it. I would apologize for it, and I'm troubled that you don't. I feel like that's really hard to understand.
I think that it's easy to attack anyone. You can pull out. You've been on TV about a year and a half now. If someone takes one segment, 1 minute of one segment over the course of a year and a half, and pulls that out and says, "Look at this, Rachel. How could you say that?" You would be made to look bad as something that might be hard to explain, or that you might want to change if you had to do differently. It's the same thing in a career of mine that spans for 25 years now. It's easy to pick and pull out one or two things and say, you know what, your whole career or what you're doing now at Americans for Prosperity is somehow discredited because of one item over a 25-year period. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't take your worst quote or your most troubling, embarrassing moment on the air and say, oh, does that define your last year and a half?
Well, let me ask you about something else then.
I wouldn't do that.
You and Ralph Reed worked on Saxby Chambliss's campaign to get elected, for him to get elected to U.S. Senate in Georgia in 2002, right? During that campaign, Mr. Chambliss's campaign ran a TV ad saying that Democratic Senator Max Cleland did not have the courage to lead. Senator Cleland, of course, lost both his legs and one arm in Vietnam. That ad juxtaposed him with a picture of bin Laden and said that he did not have the courage.
The courage to lead in the war on terror that was happening at that point in time.
That's not the truth. He doesn't have the courage to lead. You think that Max Cleland...
The context clearly, Rachel, come on.
There's a reason that this ad is notorious 7 years later. Yeah. The idea that you would take a guy who lost both legs and an arm in Vietnam and say he doesn't have courage.
The context was clearly about the war on terror taking place post 9/11. Those were very serious times. That was a crucial race. And it was clearly within the context of the ongoing war on terror.
And you think that he doesn't have the courage? You think that Max Cleland doesn't have the courage
to lead in the war on terror?
You think he's a coward?
The courage to lead in the war on terror.
Wait, he doesn't have the courage to lead in the war on terror? I did not in any way
disparage his military service to our country.
But you didn't say he hasn't led in the war on terror. You said he doesn't have the courage to lead.
The context was clearly the war on terror, Rachel, not questioning his courage to serve his country, which he did and did well.
You're saying, but he doesn't.
In the context of the war on terror.
You think that he's too cowardly to lead in the war on terror?
Look, I'm not going to parse words. It's the courage to lead in the war on terror, to make the political decisions that were necessary to make at the time post 9/11. And the Bush administration during those years absolutely made the right decisions, and they've kept us safe, and the proof's in the pudding. We've been safe now throughout the Bush administration. The courage to lead in the war on terror. That wasn't a statement about his military service. Absolutely not. It was within the context of the war that was happening at that moment in time.
I'm not just trying to cherry pick the Jack Abramoff
involvement. Sure you are,
but
that's okay.
There's the Jack Abramoff involvement. There's the Saxby Chambliss issue. There's the Koch Industries funded group that you're working at now, that is
and
fighting
back to the Koch thing. Just let me out, because you mentioned that several times now.
Yeah, David Koch taking credit just last week for having founded the group that became.
And we're thrilled. David Koch has every right to do that. And Rachel, you say, "Oh, I'm not disparaging David Koch." Of course you are. Come on.
No, I'm saying that this is an important
thing. You're being involved in the process.
No, I'm just saying when people look at that bus They look at Americans for prosperity, and they look at your big hot air balloon and say, climate change is a bunch of hot air. No, I want them to think there's a guy who's the 8th richest man in America because he inherited an oil and chemical company from his dad, who founded this group that's saying it.
Inherited, they built that company.
Okay, well, he built it with his dad.
Modern American
But I want people to look at that hot air balloon that says climate change paranoia is all hot air, and I want them to think oil and chemical company, the largest privately held oil and chemical company in the country. And for you to try to distance yourself from your own funders,
and that's why you're losing on cap and trade. That's why you're losing on healthcare. Do that all you want.
We'll see.
Well, the proof's in the pudding. Obamacare is below 50% cap and trade. There's a governor's race in Virginia right now where the Republican candidate is actually using cap and trade because Americans have woken up. They know what's going on cap and trade because groups like Americans for Prosperity go out and tell them what's going on. And if you want to keep attacking me for a flyer that was a decade old or for a TV ad that's years ago, you can. It's a losing strategy, Rachel.
I just want to know who you are, and I want America to know who you are. And I have to tell you, because we're making this about you and me, is that I personally think that you and the folks who do what you do are a parasite who gets fat on Americans' fears. And I hope
that's
that America.
Very hurtful and disappointing.
I know this sounds harmful. That's why I paused before I said it, because I wanted to make sure that I wanted to say it.
And you're disparaging a lot of Americans who are out there fighting a good fight, Rachel.
No, it's different.
Sure you are.
It's different because you're being paid to do it. And what you're doing.
And what are you being paid to do? To attack guys like me and David Koch and Art
When you signed on, you took money to say some really disgusting things in the past, like you did about those Chinese workers in the Marianas Islands, and we know who paid you to do it then. It was guys like Ralph Reed, who should have gone to prison, and guys like Jack Abramoff, who did go to prison. Now you're pushing stuff that is as disgusting, and the only difference is that we don't know this time.
Standing up for the healthcare freedoms of Americans is disgusting?
Well, no, but having speakers at your event saying that Obamacare is like Pol Pot and the Holocaust.
I haven't said that.
Right, but your speakers have, and you're organizing.
A speaker who was at an event that was co-sponsored by us. We did not have control of the podium. Again, if you want to pick out one of 600 rallies, I've asked you to come before. Come with us on the road and see these people.
I don't want to help promote you, Tim. I don't. I think what you're doing is you're getting fat, literally financially fat on Americans' fears. And
what are you getting fat financially to do, Rachel? You're doing it to
do a news show,
us.
and I'm trying to tell people who you are.
Come on, attacking us, please.
And what I hope is that people stop falling for your stick and stop being so afraid, and that your industry that takes money to do this stuff and scare people and make money off it as a, I think, Republican and corporate funded thing, I hope that your industry proverbially starves because we stop being so afraid. So I feel like I got to say that to your face because it's what's burning under the surface while I'm asking you these questions.
I can tell you're pretty upset tonight.
I'm mad about what you do. I think you're really bad for the country.
Yeah, well, you have every right to think that. We're going to keep going out there and delivering the message on healthcare and cap and trade, and we're winning at the grassroots. You go out there and look at the fire that's in this country. It's on our side. And by the way, it's not about fears. It's about loving their country. It's about wanting to do what's right for their families. You can dismiss it as fear-mongering, but in reality, it's about doing what they think is best, these American citizens who are involved. And whether it's David Koch, who's a rich guy you like to beat up on, although I never hear you trash George Soros. That's an interesting point.
I'm not beating up on David Koch. I want people to know that he funds you. That's all I want people to know. And Tim, you've been a sport to be here, and I feel like I've been as honest as I can with you, and I appreciate you being willing to talk this out in a civil way.
Glad to be here. If we can't do this, I don't know what we can do, having a civil discussion about the future of this country.
Good luck, Tim.
You bet.
Not professionally, though. Tim Phillips is the president of Americans for Prosperity. Okay, you owe it to yourself to read the New York Times Magazine's cover story this weekend. It's a profile of General McChrystal and the war in Afghanistan that's called His Long War. The author of that article, Dexter Filkins, joins us live next.